So a lot of the major media outlets have loved Salt Lake City, Utah lately, including the Salt Lake Tribune. Um, Many have accused Utah adoption agencies of exploiting birth mothers. What do you think is misunderstood or misrepresented in these stories?
I don't know. Really, I don't know because I don't know exactly what exploited means. I'm assuming by exploited they mean that they're taking advantage of her by influencing her in such a way that she does something that she would not have otherwise done.
Mhm.
And that kind of takes us back to our discussion on how to give her the space that she needs to do what she thinks is the right thing to do, and to minimize the pressure. Well, again, the reality of life is pressure, but where possible to minimize the pressure that's on her to do something that she doesn't want to do. um, if any of us are doing that, then that's not good. That's not good, and we all need to do that. If I have ever done that, I certainly want people to call me on it. If any of the other people in our state ever do that, then they would want to be called on that. I don't i don't see that happening. And I talk with the other agencies in our state a lot. And certainly I know that there's misunderstandings. One of the challenges is that birth mothers will always go through the grief process. Always. They
Mhm.
always go through the grief process. And the grief process can look differently to different people. But in general, we know that the stages are that at first they may be denying that, whatever happened, happened. Then
Mhm.
there will be a bargaining phase where the pain is there and you want to undo the pain. So you want to undo what happened. And then it goes to an angry phase where they feel anger about what happened. And if you catch somebody in that anger phase, then they will say things that are angry. And then they kind of go through a depression phase, and that's tough. And then going to an acceptance phase. Every birth mother goes through a variation of those stages of loss. And as they go through them, part of our responsibility is to try to help them understand what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. Again, I will say, I have never met a birth mom who didn't love her child. You'll go through denial, and then you'll go to anger, and then might go back to bargaining, and then you get kind of come
Mhm.
to some peace and acceptance. But then it comes up again, and you get triggered again,
Mhm.
and you go through. One of the challenges of people that write these articles is they become triggers to these women, and people that read these things, it triggers some of those emotions. Now, if someone were to sit down with them, they could probably talk it through. Again, people people hide
Mhm.
what causes them pain.
Yeah.
People avoid the situations that are going to be shameful, and we can help them heal through those processes, or we can make it worse. And we as an adoption community and as society in general would be better off if we spent more time trying to heal rather than trigger some of these very painful emotions.
Welcome to the Adoption Roadmap Podcast, your go-to guide through the beautiful, complex, and transformative journey of adoption. I'm Rebecca Gruenspan, a single mom through adoption consultant for over a decade, author of the Adoption Roadmap book, and your trusted guide. In each episode, we dive into real experiences, expert insights, and the raw, honest truths that you will need to navigate your journey. Whether you're just beginning, in the thick of it, or well past placement, you'll find support and community here to help you navigate this unique path with confidence and love. Adoption isn't all rainbows and butterflies. It is life-changing and worth every bit of effort. Let's learn, grow, and journey together on the Adoption Roadmap podcast. This one's going to be juicy. We're stepping right into one of the most controversial conversations in adoption: adoptions in Utah. They've been called the Wild West of adoption, accused of exploiting birth mothers, and labeled as one of the fastest and easiest adoption processes in the country. But at what cost? Are these criticisms fair, or is there more to the story? To help us unpack this, I'm joined by Donna Pope, single mom through adoption of 3 now grown men, executive director of Heart to Heart Adoptions, an agency licensed in Utah, Florida, and New York with a nationwide reach. Donna has been in the adoption world for over 26 years, is a strong advocate for ethical adoption practices and long-term relationships between biological and adoptive families, and is the creator of Our Hearts Connect, an innovative platform designed to support communication between members of the adoption triad. With so much controversy surrounding Utah's adoption laws, Donna is here to set the record straight, or at least give us an insider's perspective on what's really happening. Are birth mothers being coerced? Are agencies prioritizing profit over ethics? And why does Utah seem to be at the center of the adoption debate? This is Donna's first ever podcast appearance, and she's agreed to be on the hot seat. So let's show her some grace and get right into it. Donna, thanks for being brave. I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned, Utah's been called the Wild West of adoption. Some say it's an easy and fast system designed to benefit adoptive families at the expense of birth moms, and others may argue it's just efficient. How do you respond to the claim that Utah adoption laws prioritize speed over ethics?
I don't know. I've thought about that a lot, and I'm not sure that I see it much different than other states. And I know that's probably not the answer that you were hoping for, but I don't really see the laws of Utah as that much different than other states. And I could explain that a little bit more.
Yeah.
But we work in nearly all the states, and there are some states where the laws are a little more cumbersome, but by far, well over half, I was looking at the numbers, and there's about 38 of the states have laws that are very similar, or in some cases even more efficient than Utah's are. So I'm not sure where the controversy comes from. The Utah allows the birth mother to sign after 24 hours. Well, so do many of the other states do. There's a few that sign in 48 and some that are 72. But Kansas, for example, they can sign in 12. Florida, for another example, they can sign just as soon as they're ready to leave the hospital, which could be as early as 12 to 24 hours. So there's a lot of states that laws are very similar than Utah's. So in that way, making it faster, I don't think that it is much faster as far as that part of the law.
Well, all right. So you talk about being able to sign consents as soon as 24 hours after the birth.
For sure.
So is there a fine line between obeying the law and doing the quote unquote right thing by all the parties involved?
Oh, yeah. No, I hear what you're saying there. So the question is, what if the birth mom doesn't want to sign by 24 hours? What if she wants to wait a couple of days? What if she wants to wait a week? What if she doesn't want a place at all? Great. And that's where I'm a little confused why there's criticism, because if she's not ready to sign, nobody should encourage her to sign. If she wants to wait for 2 days, 4 days, never, then she should have that right to wait as long as she wants to. Is there pressure to sign? Well, if there is, then that needs to be looked at. Then that needs to be considered, because no one should feel pressure to do anything that they don't want to do.
Well, I was going to ask that. Like, how do you know if she wants to or if she feels like she has to?
Yeah, I don't know what has to means. The thing about birth moms is that they're usually in tough spots. They call and consider an adoption plan generally because they already are in a difficult spot. And the have to oftentimes comes about because of the conditions of their life at the time. They don't have the finances, there's drugs involved, there's an abusive situation, they're overwhelmed with other things. There's many reasons why they consider they have to do an adoption plan.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when they have the baby, obviously there's generally some re-questioning. They need to make the decision all over again, because it's one thing to uh, say I'm going to do an adoption when the baby's not there, and it's a whole nother thing when the baby's actually there, that they go, whoa, I love this baby and I don't want to have to do this. And so at that point, the going through the decision making process generally happens all over again. And how long it will take them to go through that decision making process, that's individual. But do they sometimes feel pressure that the realities of life, they have to leave the hospital, they need to make arrangements for childcare, they need to come up with money to buy a car seat, whatever the reality of the situation is, sometimes that creates natural pressure. And that's just reality. Now, should there ever be anybody, a social worker, a case manager, a nurse, anybody that puts more pressure on top of the realities? No, there shouldn't be. In fact, in some ways, they should try to kind of relieve that pressure as much as possible, to allow them to, work through that decision making process again. Um, One of the most common things we do is, when they're going through that decision making process again, is invite them to go back and remember why it was that they had decided to do an adoption in the first place. What were the conditions that led to that? And then ask the question, has any of that changed? Because if none of it has changed, then they're probably in the same circumstances they were when they made the original decision. But on top of that is this love that they have for this child.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that there's never, someone asked me this one time. They said, have you ever known a birth mother who didn't love their child? No, no, I never have. And I've never known someone who didn't hold that baby and think, oh, I love this child, and have to now go through that decision making process again,
Mm-hmm.
in the light of holding this little baby that they love. And it's
Yeah.
tough. How long does it take to move through that process? Well, that's individual. And some people do it really fast. Some people, they don't question it. They can see
Yeah.
that their life circumstances have never changed, and others struggle. And in those cases, there is a balance to how long do you help them struggle with the process. Um, but putting pressure on them at any of those times, no one should put pressure on them. Does life and just the realities of life put pressure on them? Yes.
Sure. Sure. So if you see that a mom might be struggling, or if you have been working with her and you know she's somebody who's maybe a little bit more timid,
Mhm.
um, how do you treat those situations any different if you do? I mean, do you try to encourage them to take longer than maybe they need to by the law, or
Yeah,
how do
for
you
sure. Well,
work with
no,
those?
obviously, absolutely, absolutely. Now,
Hmm.
there are some natural consequences when they're struggling like that. It's I hate to say it, but it's kind of nice if they need to stay in the hospital a little longer because it gives them a little more time. And sometimes they don't. And so in that case, then they can go home, or maybe you can help them with a hotel, or you can help them with whatever it is that they need to give them a little more time.
Yeah.
um, that can't be that can't be forever, and it usually can't be more than a few days because the reality of life starts to hit in. um, and so in those cases they do feel a lot of pressure, but giving them some additional space is a nice thing.
Yeah, and I do want to mention that um, pressure comes from, this word pressure, right? Comes from a lot of different ways, like you said. It
Right.
could come from societal and just their own internal pressures. It could come from the agency, hopefully not.
Mhm.
And it can also come on the opposite side from the hospital.
Yeah.
They could be pressuring a mom to keep the baby when the mom has already made the decision that it's not the right thing, and that's just as harmful sometimes.
Yeah. Giving them the space they need to make this
Mhm.
decision in a way that they feel good about it
Mhm.
is really key.
Yeah, so people throw around this term ethical when
Yeah.
it comes to adoption.
Yeah.
That word can be interpreted so many ways by different people. What do you consider ethical,
Yeah.
and what does that look like to you?
No, I love that. If you look at the definition, it's to do
Mm.
good, and I come from a medical background, and there's the old medical saying of "do no harm" in medicine, and and in some ways, an ethical adoption is where not only do you do no harm, but as much as possible you do good. The challenge with adoption is that there are many factors. Particularly there's four major people or entities in the adoption. There's first and foremost the child. Then there's the birth mother and the birth father. And then there's the adoptive family. And so you've got those four entities. And what I consider a good ethical adoption would be when somehow you can align the interest of those four different entities together. That to me is a perfect adoption, and it's perfectly ethical because the good is aligned for all four of those entities. Not always can you align the interest of those. So then you have to look at, well, whose interest is priority? Well, I think we can all more or less agree that the child's interest is the highest priority. The
Mhm.
challenge of that is that the child's a child, and they really have no say, and they have no um, ability to say what their interest is. So then you have to say, well, in general, what is in the best interest of a child? Well, I think we could all agree that in the best interest of the child is for them to have a family, a home, permanency, not being bounced around,
Mhm.
allowed to attach. I think we could all agree that that is an ethical thing for the child. Now
Mhm.
the question is, what is the best interest of the birth mom? And you've already touched on it a little bit. And that is that she be honored with both space and compassion to
Mhm.
um, have the space and the time that she needs to make what she feels is a good decision on behalf of her child. Now, we never know everything that's going on in her life. We do not know hardly anything. We only know what she tells us, and what we can see about what's going on in her life.
Mhm.
But giving her the space that she needs to make the decision she thinks is in her best interest and the best interest of her child, and honoring that decision, um, that is ethical. Then the other person involved in this is the birth father. Now,
Yeah.
it's wonderful when the birth father is in alignment with her. That's amazing and it's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, that's not the case. Most birth mothers, the reason they choose an adoption plan is because they aren't receiving the support that they need from the birth father. And that can be for many, many reasons. They may not know who he is, that he may have skipped town, they may have not had a relationship, all kinds of reasons, even to the point he may be abusive, he may be, all these things could be there. It's really nice when he's involved and he's a part of it, and his desires and interests align with hers. So what do you do if they don't? Well, you kind of have to prioritize her and then invite him to be a part of it, and then look at his responsibility level. If he's taking responsibility and has taken responsibility, then absolutely he needs to be considered. If he's, not been involved at all, well, there's not much you can do except for invite him to be involved. But if she doesn't want him involved, then you kind of have to honor some of her wishes there. So there's a challenge to balance the interests of the birth father and the interests of the birth mother when they're not aligned.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the adoptive family. What are the interests of the adoptive family? Well, they want to be parents. They want to parent this child. We feel very strongly that you need to align those. If she's not, if her desire is not to place the child with them, her desires need to be honored. And but when she does make that placement, then you have to go back to the child's, and try to maintain permanency and a stable relationship for the child. And so the challenge always of an ethical adoption is as close to an alignment in the interests of those four parties as possible. And sometimes you can't do it. And in those cases, the priorities kind of have to be the child, and then the birth mom, the birth father, if he's involved, and then the adoptive family. You kind of have to prioritize those in that way.
Yeah, and it's so hard for the adoptive family too. And
Yes.
we're both adoptive parents, right?
Yeah.
Having so much. Well, first I'll go back. A lot of families ask me, well, why do we need a consultant? And my answer is that for most agencies, not all, some do it differently than others, some do it better than others, but for most agencies, the focus is on the birth mom, giving them the support they need, the love they need, the resources they need. And depending on how large or small the agency is, sometimes the adoptive parent feels like, here I am paying all these tens of thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Who is my advocate?
Yeah.
Who's here for me? And I tell them that's where a consultant really comes into the picture. Number one, to help them manage their expectations and to understand why this might be, right? And who knows, for some hopeful parents, maybe when they think of ethical, they think of that piece of it as well, right?
For sure.
Well, we're spending tens of thousands of dollars. What happens if a mom changes her mind? Where does that leave us? Now, this is not my thoughts and feelings personally. I'm just, giving you a thought of things I've heard,
No, I
right?
totally agree. Totally agree.
And I get it. Yeah, it's a hard pill to swallow, because then when that happens, typically a family, not necessarily with heart to heart, but typically a family will lose anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 on average, or more.
No, I get it. And to me, that's a little bit unethical, um, because it causes harm to that adoptive family.
Mm-hmm.
So the challenge is, how do you balance the financial stability of an agency with the financial stability of the adoptive family? And there again, it's a balance.
Yeah.
We've chosen to do it a little different than other people in that we have a very minimal risk to the adoptive family.
Mm-hmm.
And we're very committed to, I tell adoptive families this all the time, that if they have a failed adoption, stick with us or stick with somebody. They don't have to stick with us, but stick with somebody, stick with the process. And the
Mm-hmm.
time will come that they'll hold the baby in their arms and they'll know this child is theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't think of any time where, if the adoptive family was willing to go through the pain and the frustration of an adoption that doesn't work out, that if they stuck with us, we weren't able to help them find the child that they would consider theirs. And in the process, what they've learned and how they've grown, we call it becoming seasoned, that they become seasoned, they become stronger, they become more attuned to the feelings of loss. And I don't want adoptive families to hurt,
Yeah.
but I do love it when they understand how a birth mom feels. And a
Yeah.
birth mother hurts. They feel lost. Now, do I want to put that on anybody? No. But when they can think of their own struggles and their own losses that they've been through and can relate to the birth mother in a different way because of those, ooh, that makes a good adoption. The birth
Yeah.
mother then feels heard, understood, seen in a way that she may not have otherwise.
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way, but you're so right. I mean, we've often said that sometimes you have to go through the hurt and the struggle for, it to work out on the other side. And typically when that happens for families, they say they would do it again, tenfold, because they know they ended up with the right situation all around for everybody involved.
Right.
But I never thought about it from the sense that if you go through that loss, you have better empathy and maybe even a stronger connection with that mom in the long run, that you do end up
For sure.
um, matching with and adopting her child. That's interesting.
So the way to make that happen and that doable,
Yeah.
it's a burden on the agency. And this is where agencies need to kind of pick it up. They need to step up and they need to relieve, in the same way that you're saying that the agency needs to give space for the birth mother to make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of need to give a bit of financial space, in a way,
Hmm.
for the adoptive families to be able to move forward. They feel pressure. Adoptive
Yeah.
families feel pressure, and a big part of that is the financial part of it. And so the challenge is, how do you as an agency give the adoptive family some financial relief or softness to allow them to continue to move forward without being destroyed financially? And that's another balance.
I love that you're bringing this up, because I rarely hear agencies bringing that up. In fact, it's usually the opposite with the cost of living and the cost of adoptions. And I get that too. I'm a
Sure.
business owner. Hey, listen, I'm not doing this for free. And I need to serve all the people that I'm serving, right? It's a
Right.
trickle effect. There are grant organizations that are lovely, and it shouldn't just be up. Everybody should come at this with a holistic
Rebecca, I love what you're saying.
viewpoint.
It Adoption is confused. A lot of times people from the outside get confused about adoption because they see it as a transactional thing.
Yeah.
Because birth mother uh, gives baby to agency, agency gives baby to adoptive family gives money, and so they see it transactionally. Whew, we got to get away from that. I mean, there is transaction there, but we need to see it more as a societal benefit, because there, for every birth mother that actually places her child for adoption, the agency probably talks to 150
Mhm.
other birth mothers who don't choose to do an adoption. Well, nobody pays for that. That is a cost that's there. In the same way, the adoptive family has to scrape together this money that you know, they put it out there, and if they lose it, then now it's a struggle for them. So again, society helping out wherever society can in the ways of grants, in the ways of donations, can help allow space for both birth mother and adoptive family to search through what's the good thing to do in an adoption.
Yeah. And the agencies and resources that are serving all those parties.
For sure.
Right? There's a role for all of us. So you brought up the adoptive father.
You bet.
And most people don't, as one of the core what did you call it?
I call it
entities. Yep. The core entities of adoption. So number one, kudos to you for bringing up the adoptive father, but some argue that the adoption laws in Utah make it easier for fathers to be excluded from the process. There are reports of bio dads not being notified before an adoption is finalized or before an adoption even takes place. So how does Utah law protect or fail to protect a father's rights? And I know we talked about that, you and I, at a conference recently, and you really opened my eyes. So I'd love for you to talk about that. Before we go on, we're going to take a quick break, but don't go away. We still have so much to talk about. Hey there, Adoption Roadmap fam. Are you ready to take the next step on your journey to parenthood? If so, head over to our website and take our quiz. It's called, Are You Ready to Adopt? It's not just about testing your knowledge. It's about making sure you're emotionally and practically prepared for the beautiful, complex journey of adoption. Let's make your dream of parenthood a reality. Go to rgadoptionconsulting.com and take the Are You Ready to Adopt quiz today. That's rgadoptionconsulting.com. The quiz is free, and it will let you know where you are in the process and if you're ready to jump into your adoption journey. Before an adoption even takes place. So how does Utah law protect or fail to protect a father's rights? And I know we talked about that, you and I, at a conference recently, and you really opened my eyes. So I'd love for you to talk about that.
Yeah. In fact, Utah, it's a funny thing because it has probably one of the most progressive ways of dealing with birth fathers, in the sense that if a birth mother wants to be private, she either doesn't know who the birth father is, or for whatever reason she chooses not to name him. Well, you can't notify someone you don't know who they are. There's no way to notify them. Now, if, however, his name is on the birth certificate, if he's married to her, or if he's provided her support in any way, then he has done something to show that he wants to be a part of it. And in those cases, he has certain rights. And there's really two rights. There's the right to receive notification, and then there's the right to withhold or give his consent to the adoption. And so there's certain things that are allowed for both of those rights. In Utah, if he's on the birth certificate, if he's provided her support, or they've lived together, or if they're married, then he has the right to notice. Now, depending on the extent of his support would determine whether or not he has the right to consent. However, and this is the thing that's unique about Utah law, if he doesn't know anything about it, and he, let's say, is in Iowa or someplace, if he at least knew she was pregnant, then if he's done anything in that state, we in Utah have the responsibility to honor whatever he's done in his state. He doesn't need to do it in Utah. If he's done anything. Now, what can he do? Well, most states have what's called a putative father registry. Now, putative father simply means they're not married. If he, and it's in, and you can find it pretty easily in the Department of Health and Human Services in the state, and just look it up. It's easy. Putative father registry. If he files with that, which is very simple to do in all these states, then he has now the right to notice.
Does it cost money to file?
I'm not honestly sure. I know it
Okay.
doesn't in most states, but I can't guarantee that it's not like $10, $15 or something.
Okay.
But if it is, it's minimal.
Okay.
And so one of the responsibilities of all agencies is to search those registries. And the laws of Utah require that that you search and look for any minimal amount of effort that he's done wherever he may think that she's involved. Um, so sometimes we'll search like 3 or 4 or 5 states just to see if he's done anything else. Now, there are some states that don't have a putative father registry. In those cases, what he would need to do is file a paternity action. And that, again, would require a little more finances because you'd have to get an attorney and do some things there. And a strong argument would be for all those states to give it a putative father registry, so it's very easy. But our responsibility is to search the counties in which he may think that she's at and see if there's been any paternity actions done. So you can't notify somebody if you don't know who they are. And if she doesn't say, she has that right. She has a right to privacy. Can you encourage her and support her? For sure. Absolutely. But again, now we're going back to the balance of interest there. But even if she does not say one word, we have the responsibility to search out wherever he may have filed anything that gives him rights.
Thank you for explaining that. You said something I was going to bring up, which is you cannot force a mom to give a name. And that is not just for Utah. That is in any state or any country or any person that you talk to. You can't force a person to say anything, right? Just like when you get an adoption situation, you're reading all the records. Almost every agency says, this is reported by an expectant mom. This is the mom's words. We cannot guarantee any of it. You also can't force her to name anybody.
And it goes back to that balance. Her interests may be different than his interests. I was in a court the other day, and the judge says to her, and it made me cringe. I really did. I cringed when he did this. He says, "You need to tell me who the father is." And she stammered, and she gave a name, and he said, "Remember, you're under oath. Is that really who it is?" And I cringed because of the violation I saw of her rights there. Now, does he have rights? For sure. And so again, it comes back to the balance of people's rights. An ethical adoption is when, as much as possible, you can get those interests aligned.
So let me ask you a question. When a mom comes in and you ask who the father is, and she either says, I don't want to name him, or I don't know.
How hard to
What's
push?
what's your next question?
Well, people have a natural tendency to hide things that they think might hurt them. So if I've done something I think I'm not happy about, or I think if I tell people it's going to come back and hurt me, I'm going to lie, or I'm going to hide, or I'm going to, avoid the conversation. Our job is not to push that. Our job is to create a space, again, where they can feel more comfortable that they can tell the truth. And that by telling the truth, we will minimize any possible harm that might come to them. Now, how do you do that? Well, first of all, you find out their story, and you find out, why would she not want to name him? What's going on in the story that makes her afraid to just say? And then if you can assess, did he threaten her life? I mean, is he going to come after her? Does she not know who he is? Um, all of these, finding out what the story is, and then as carefully as possible, trying to minimize the harm that might come to her by being more honest and truthful. And part of that is I talk to lots and lots of birth fathers. It's my favorite part of my job, honestly. It is. I love birth fathers, in part because, I have grown boys and I kind of know how grown boys think. And I know, I understand. And I love to talk with them. And generally, if I get the chance to visit with them, we can come to some sort of arrangement that may benefit him as well. And you mentioned Our Hearts Connect, and that is a platform that we've created where the birth mother and the adoptive family can be in a special confidential group, but we can also bring the birth father in. Or if the relationship between the mom and the father are not good, we can have a separate group for the adoptive family and the birth father and allow him um, to be a part of things, even if
Mhm.
maybe the relationship between him and the birth mom are not good. We can bring him in. But again, it's a balance. It's a balance.
I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but I want to ask, so a lot of the major media outlets have loved Salt Lake City, Utah lately, including the Salt Lake Tribune. Um, Many have accused Utah adoption agencies of exploiting birth mothers. What do you think is misunderstood or misrepresented in these stories?
I don't know. Really, I don't know because I don't know exactly what exploited means. I'm assuming by exploited they mean that they're taking advantage of her by influencing her in such a way that she does something that she would not have otherwise done.
Mhm.
And that kind of takes us back to our discussion on how to give her the space that she needs to do what she thinks is the right thing to do, and to minimize the pressure. Well, again, the reality of life is pressure, but where possible to minimize the pressure that's on her to do something that she doesn't want to do. um, if any of us are doing that, then that's not good. That's not good, and we all need to do that. If I have ever done that, I certainly want people to call me on it. If any of the other people in our state ever do that, then they would want to be called on that. I don't i don't see that happening. And I talk with the other agencies in our state a lot. And certainly I know that there's misunderstandings. One of the challenges is that birth mothers will always go through the grief process. Always. They
Mhm.
always go through the grief process. And the grief process can look differently to different people. But in general, we know that the stages are that at first they may be denying that, whatever happened happened. Then
Mhm.
there will be a bargaining phase where the pain is there and you want to undo the pain. So you want to undo what happened. And if you catch somebody in the bargaining phase, they will often say, no, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do that. No, they didn't. They feel hurt, frustrated, lost. And then it goes to an angry phase where they feel anger about what happened. And if you catch somebody in that anger phase, then they will say things that are angry. And then they kind of go through a depression phase, and that's tough. And then going to an acceptance phase. Every birth mother goes through a variation of those stages of loss. And as they go through them, part of our responsibility is to try to help them understand what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. Again, I will say, I have never met a birth mom who didn't love her child. Now, if she loves her child and then she places her child, she will feel grief and loss, and she will go through many of these emotions, and sometimes they will be shared, and that's a challenge. It's a challenge.
That makes so much sense to me, and I've never heard it described that way. Yes, I mean, if we think about divorce, infertility, placing a child, any sort of loss, we all go through those stages for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we are hearing in the media all this stuff, yeah, it would be interesting to follow up with a lot of these moms who are saying things, a year later, or how long do you think it usually takes, Donna?
Oh, it just so totally depends. And
Mm-hmm.
and it's not like the stages go one after another. They bounce back
Okay.
and forth. You'll go
Okay.
through you'll go through denial, and then you'll go to anger, and then might go back to bargaining, and then you get kind of
Mm-hmm.
come to some peace and acceptance, but then it comes up again and you get triggered again,
Mm-hmm.
and you go through. One of the challenges of people that write these articles is they become triggers to these women, and people that read these things, it triggers some of those emotions. Now if someone were to sit down with them, they could probably talk it through. Again, people people hide
Mm-hmm.
what causes them pain.
Yeah.
People avoid the situations that are going to be shameful, and we can help them heal through those processes, or we can make it worse. And we as an adoption community and as society in general would be better off if we spent more time trying to heal rather than uh, trigger some of these very painful emotions.
So I think that what I've heard as far as all the scrutiny in Utah and in a lot of these articles comes back to marketing, which is a big part of any business.
Mhm.
By the way, if anyone didn't know that. And when it comes to marketing for expectant moms, it gets a lot of scrutiny.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, there have been reports of aggressive, quote unquote, aggressive marketing tactics by Utah adoption agencies targeting pregnant women from other states. What are your thoughts on working across state lines when you don't necessarily have a physical presence in those states? Let's talk about that because it is questioned a lot.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think a better person to ask would be the birth moms. And I've asked
Mhm.
them a lot, um, why did you call us? Um, uh, Most marketing anymore, when I first started, all marketing was done in yellow pages.
Yeah.
Now, and if you wanted to put your ad in somebody's yellow page, you paid them the money, and there was a physical thing. That's not the way any marketing is done anymore. Now it's all on the internet, and so you put your website out there. You maybe put ads in Google AdWords, but how do those ads reach people? Well, they reach them because they ask questions like open adoption, or need help placing baby for adoption, or give up my baby. They'll type in something that then brings up these ads. And then they can look at them and review them and then decide whether or not to respond to them or call. And so I've asked people, why did you call us? Why didn't you call the agency down the road? And invariably, they will say because they couldn't provide me what I needed. um, well, what did you need that they couldn't provide you? And so then you can kind of explore that. Well, what do birth moms need? Well, they need, first of all, someone to listen to them. They need someone that will hear them and that will help them uh, address the issues that they're struggling with. And so they need good counseling. They need someone that will listen to them, that will hear them, that will see them. Now, does every state have people like that? Well, yeah, I think so, for sure. for sure. And the second thing that they need is they sometimes need financial support. If we're asking a birth mother to grow a baby, I guess you could say, but bring life to this child, we're asking her to give up other things, which may be a job, it may be other opportunities in order for her to bring life to this child. That's a big deal. It's a tough thing to do. So they are almost always in difficult financial situations.
Mm-hmm.
So having someone who can help them with the finances, the housing, the getting to the doctor, the food. Most birth mothers have other children, helping them with their other children. That takes some financial help. It's not buying her child, it's simply supporting her as she gives life to this child. That's something that she needs. The most important thing, in my opinion, birth mothers need is a good family. Somebody that she can connect with, that she can feel comfortable, that she wants to place her baby for adoption with. That sometimes is one of the more challenging things for different states to have. They may not have an abundance of families that she may feel comfortable with. And so a lot of times, one of the things that birth mothers look for is they'll look for families that agencies may have. And they might find a family that they relate to more than another one. And so those three things, someone that can support them and help them, someone that can help them get through this period of time while they have the baby, and then someone that can help them find the family that they feel comfortable placing the child with. Now, I would go further, and that is someone that will continue to support them even after the placement happens, that can help this long-term healthy relationship between them and the adoptive family. Those are services. And are they found everywhere? No, they're not. They're not. But are they found in a lot of places? Oh, for sure. There's a lot of amazing agencies out there that can provide those four levels of services. Should we tell a birth mother that lives in Arkansas, you can't have those services? You can't have them because you're in Arkansas. No, no, we don't do that. And I'm not picking on Arkansas. There's great services in
Mm-hmm.
Arkansas. But if she finds someone, do we tell her? No. You have to be limited in the services that you can have because of your location. Well, that's part of the reality of life for sure. But we all know that we look for, when we have a service that we need, we search for it. We all do that, regardless of what the area is that we're searching for. We ought to provide that same opportunity for women that are doing the most important thing of their life, finding a home for their child.
And do you do that by bringing them to you, or do you go to them?
Yeah, that's changed over the years for us. Um, if a birth mother is homeless and she's living in a tent down by the river, or she's in an abusive situation and she doesn't have other options, certainly we want to provide her that option. And sometimes that can be for her to come to apartments that we have. I will tell you that right now, about 80% of all the women we work with want to stay where they're at. They're comfortable with their doctor. They're financially at least okay enough that they have housing and they have their children. They don't want to pull their children out of school. And so by far, about 80% stay where they're at. And we work with them generally in association with their local resources as well. Um, but some, they got to get away. They got to get away. And so we'll help them in those cases.
Do you think that's the case for most agencies in Utah? Because I think you might be rare in saying that a lot of times you'll go there and that's changed. I think there's a lot of other agencies that almost every single adoption is in Utah.
Yeah, I don't.
Are there conversations about that? Do you know
Yeah,
that other
I,
agencies have been having?
yeah, and I think probably maybe a little bit more. Um, I think it goes back to that whole idea of giving the mom the space, whether that be physical space or emotional space, to make the best decision that she can. And that takes time, and it takes kind of a finessing to give her. Sometimes she needs a different physical space, but sometimes she just needs the emotional space. And how all of the agencies do it, I don't know all the numbers for them.
Fair enough. I just didn't know if it was like a conversation being had among, you said you talk a lot to the other agencies. And I do want to state we are talking to one person from one agency in Utah.
Yeah,
Just like w- every adoptee has their own story and
have our
every
story
person right. So that this is
for
one
sure.
story in Utah.
I certainly know the intention of giving that space for birth mothers is there. That I do know. As I've talked with all agencies, that desire to do the best for that birth mother is always there.
If you've been loving this conversation, don't miss part 2 next week, where we continue to dive in. We have so much more to cover, and you won't want to miss it. Here's a sneak peek. What do you wish people understood about adoptions in Utah that maybe they don't?
I think years ago, we wanted Utah to be kind of a safe harbor. And this is where maybe some of the misunderstandings. We wanted it to be a safe harbor, a place where adoptions could happen. But I don't know that that's any different from any other state. Again, I go back to this idea of a space. The agency itself should be a place for adoptive families to come and feel honored and cared about and respected. The birth mother needs to be able to come to a safe place where her story can be heard, where she can be seen, where she can be cared about and respected. But also, there's other parts to the part as well. There's the adoptive family, and all of them need to come together. Does Utah do that well? I would like to think that we do.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. If you did, I have a few favors to ask of you. First, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, I'd love to hear your takeaways. Please write a review and let me know what you liked. And if you have a question or a suggestion on what you'd like to hear, I'd love to hear that too. Please shoot me an email at support@rgadoptionconsulting.com and let me know what you'd like to hear about. And if you have a question, I may just answer it online. Thanks again for listening. Tune in every Wednesday and Friday morning for a brand new episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.